churches and has spoken in over 200 churches about various topics, including the church's interaction with government and developing a Christian worldview. He received his bachelor's degree from Tennessee Temple University in business with a minor in Bible. He and his wife had 2 children, and we are about ready to start with Randy Osborne. You guys you're going to have to be very quiet. I'm sorry, we are doing this electronically with amplified speakers and a microphone system. So please be very patient and quiet.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. Let me know how the volume's doing. First of all, I want to thank Congressman Yoho for being there today. Isn't he awesome? I really appreciate this. I really apologize. I really wanted to be with y'all today, and we had some flight issues because of 9/11 and the weekend. There's a lot of security issues going on, so nothing of any issue, just they're just tight in security, that's fine with me. A couple years ago, there was actually an international medical conference was held with doctors from all over the world that were in attendance. During a lunch break, several of these doctors were discussing new technologies in their countries. And an Israeli doctor, he spoke up and he said, you know, medicine in my country is so advanced that we can take a kidney out of one man, put it in another, and have him up and looking for work in 6 weeks. Well, a British doctor says, you know, that's nothing. We can take a lung out of one person, put it in another, and have him looking for work in 4 weeks. Well, a Canadian doctor, he pops up and says, you know, in my country it's so advanced that we can take a heart out of one person, put it in another, and have both of them looking for work in 2 weeks. Well, there's a Nigerian doctor, he didn't want to be outdone. He said, you guys are way, way, way behind. In fact, we just took a man with no brain, made him president, and now the whole country is looking for work. I'm sorry, this is a tea party, right? I can say that, I think. You know, I want to kind of give you the background of really where I come from. And first of all, I love history. It's really history is actually just a window into the future. A little while back, my wife reminded me some of the first dates that we had together, and I actually took her to the Little White House in Georgia. It was actually where Franklin Roosevelt's second home was. And if y'all know anything about that, he would get away, and they actually called it the Little White House. And my wife and I were talking a few days ago, and I thought, you know, that's probably not the most romantic place to be on a date or to take somebody, but you know, I just love history. In fact, our family vacations, many times they would include some of America's most historical spots and places. I would enjoy walking where great leaders walk, and I would think about the tough decisions that they made and how it actually shaped our republic in which we live today. You see, the study of history actually makes your car more reliable. It makes the weather service more predictable. Well, that's kind of a question that we still have, but as a result of history, it drives the most complex parts of society. You see, history is indeed the window to the future. There's a famous philosopher, his name is George Santayana. He said this: those who disregard history are condemned to repeat it. You see, if a culture can rewrite history, they can corrupt and destroy the very foundation of a nation. Shortly after World War I, there's a gentleman that came on the scene. I use that term loosely. His name was Adolf Hitler, and he was a leading member of the Nazi Party. Seeing the weakness of the government, Hitler attempted to overthrow the Bavarian government, hoping that it would feed into Berlin and ultimately take over Berlin. Well, it failed, and it cost him 5 years in a posh prison. You see, during that time, Hitler, he did two things. One of them is he worked on his oracle skills. And the second thing he did is he wrote a piece of work, as we know, as Mein Kampf. You see, the time was right, the economy was tanking, and he would not let a crisis go to waste. Sound familiar? I'm not going to go through and give you the whole plan on how Hitler came to power, but I want to give you one principle today that I think is relevant for the topic that I want to talk about today. You see, one of the issues that he identified was the training and education of children. You see, Hitler made that the responsibility of the state. Now, I want you to understand something, that Germany was indeed a democracy. Now, I want you to understand that he took a democracy and he made it a socialist dictatorship in a very, very short period of time. I also want you to understand clearly that America is not a democracy. You see, America is a republic form of government. It's a representative form of government. It is not a democracy. But Hitler did take this democracy of Germany and he turned it into a socialist dictatorship in a very, very short period of time. He made the education of our children the responsibility of the state, not the parents. He took prayer out of schools and all foundations of religious morality. The state dictated what was right and wrong. He imposed laws that made it nearly impossible for parents to send their children to a private school or homeschool. The state took full responsibility to teach the children. The state propagated the curriculum. See, the children were literally being brainwashed into Hitler's socialism. Several months ago, during the House session, a lot of times, because I am a lobbyist, I was there, and I was sitting, listening to speeches on the floor. And sometimes I'll go to the gallery and I'll just do some work, or I'll just sit there and wait for my bill to be passed or to fail. And I was sitting there one day, a few months back, and there was a debate on the House floor, and this is what the debate was about. The debate was specifically whose responsibility it was to educate our children. Was it the state's responsibility or was it the parents' responsibility? In fact, one representative said, you know, our educators, they've had training, they've had extensive training. Some of them have doctorate degrees in education and some in child psychology, and they know what's best for the children, not the parents. Folks, I heard this in the Capitol in the state of Florida. And obviously, that particular issue got defeated. We do have a Republican majority, and they did indeed defeat that. But the problem is that is becoming more and more of an issue throughout our country, and specifically even in the state of Florida. And that brings me to the next topic that I want to talk about. It is Common Core. And I'm kind of going to give you just a really quick overview of Common Core. I'm going to give you some basic issues that as a free society we cannot accept. And then I'm going to give you a couple of the issues that the other side is saying specifically about Common Core. Common Core standards, first of all, they were developed by an organization called the Council of Chief School Officers and the National Governors Association. All of these were generously funded by the Bill and Gates Foundation, and 80% of the funding of the National Governors Association, as well as the Council of Chief School Officers, State Chief School Officers, were funded. 80% of the funding that came to that organization came from the federal government. Now here's the issue that I would have with that. If I was a if I was a nonprofit organization, the majority donor to my organization is the one that's going to have the controlling share of my organization. Would I not listen to what they're leading and how they're leading? The creation of Common Core, it was neither grassroots nor did it emanate from the states, though many of the opponents would argue it. You see, it wasn't volunteer, nor was it state-led. These standards are specifically now in English language arts and math. But the proponents, in fact, the U.S. Department of Education has stated that they have plans for all subjects to be included in this. I'm going to kind of give you a background of how Common Core came to the state. Back a few years ago, back in fact 2009, 2010, the state of Florida, as well as most states, were in a serious economic recession. During that period of time, the federal government, U.S. Department of Education, offered grants. It was race to the top funding. In that particular case, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.35 billion through the American Recovery Act, which we would also know as the stimulus money. You see, during that period of time, most of the states were in serious financial trouble, including the state of Florida. Well, what happened is the federal government offered grants during that period of time, and those grants were being offered under these conditions. One of the conditions is that the state of Florida, as well as other states, would adopt the Common Core standards. Now, you know, for anybody to say that this is not a federalization or not federal control of our education system, I would have an issue with that. Because, again, it was voluntary, but if you were to accept this grant money, which the states almost had to have because of the financial conditions that they were in, if you accepted the money, you had to promote and you actually had to implement Common Core standards. In addition to that, you also had to align some data points, which is in excess of 400 data points from the states, from the children, directly to the federal government. Those were two of the requirements to accept that grant money through Race to the Top money. Another thing that they did is in the No Child Left Behind waivers, they would actually give waivers to states on the condition that they adopt the Common Core standards. Some of the ideology of Common Core standards may have good intentions. However, as a free society, there are several things that we just cannot accept. And I'm not going to go into all the issues with Common Core. It is an absolute quagmire when you start digging into it and finding out who's funding what and where some of the money is coming from and who is supporting it. But I am going to give you some basic issues about Common Core that are deal breakers to me personally and to a free society. One of the requirements, as I mentioned before, to money requirement that Florida aligned on other children, the National Center for Education Statistics National Data Model. Now, this data model, it contains hundreds of items, including academic and non-academic data. But I'm going to stop for just a minute, and I'm going to say that your proponents of Common Core would say, Randy, this is just Common Core standards. This is just standards. It has data. Well, there's two major issues with that. If you look at the U.S. Department of Education, as they describe specifically from their files, as they describe specifically about Common Core standards, which you'll find exists is program. With the Bush foundations, which is adequately financing and funding this endeavor. They're also pushing it across the state as well, across the nation. I was in a debate with one of the gentlemen on that foundation, and he basically made the same statement. He said, this is just standards. This has nothing to do with data mining. And I said, well, that's interesting, because there was a Senate bill that I worked against this past session. It was called Senate Bill 878. Now, I called this bill the infamous data mining bill. This was the bill that was required by the federal government to be passed in the state to align our children's data with the federal government. Now, as I was looking at this, and as I was fighting with against this, one of the senators that actually sponsored the bill didn't even, by the way, he didn't even know that the data mining model was actually in the bill, and which is a problem. But in addition to that, as we were working on it, I talked to some of the representatives and senators on this, and I said, where did you get this language? I mean, you don't even know it's in there, and now I'm showing you that it's in there. Obviously, you guys did not write it, even though you sponsored it. Who helped you write this bill? And they told me that the Bush Foundation helped them write the bill. So here I am in a debate against this. My opponent jumps up and says, the data mining bill. So I would have to say that they're being inaccurate at best, they're being disingenuous, and in some cases they're flat out lying about this, because indeed it is part of the Common Core program. This data will be stored from kindergarten through career. Their psychological include things such as mindsets, learning strategies, effort for control, attributes, dispositions, social skills, attitudes, and interpersonal resources. And I end that quote that actually came from the National Research Council and the U.S. Department of Education. They're also saying that they're saying things that are to be measured are things such as, and they're quoting, a new assessment systems are developed to reflect, quote, the new standards, which is the Common Core standards in English language arts, mathematics, and science. Oops, I guess I slipped on that one because science hasn't been implemented yet, and they're not promoting that. They're saying it's just in English language arts and in mathematics. The same report that I was just citing, it goes on to say a sustained program, this is I quote again, a sustained program of research and development will be required to create assessments that are measuring cognitive, interpersonal, and intrapersonal skills. I end the quote. You don't think that's data mining, and you don't think that's psychological manipulation of our children? Yes, indeed, that's exactly what it is. You see, there's nothing new under the sun. In fact, if you go over 3,000 years ago, there was a king, actually it's in the Old Testament in Jeremiah 52, it talks about a king Nebuchadnezzar. And right after he defeated Jerusalem, he took the young people and he was re-educating them, is what he was doing. And by the way, as we move fast forward, we see Hitler doing the same thing. We see many of the communist countries doing the same thing. And now we see the United States starting to push into the same agenda. And oh, by the way, on the data mining, the teachers will not be exempt from this. In fact, even though that some of the major teacher unions have come out in support of Common Core, now we're starting to see breaks in that, and we're starting to see local unions starting to come out against Common Core. The second issue that I have with Common Core is the standards are it's national curriculum. It's national, that is national curriculum. You say, wait, Randy, it's just standards. It's not national curriculum, it's just standards. Well, I would have to say this. If you can imagine taken a piece of chocolate cake, a beautiful, nice chocolate cake, and you have it here, and you taste it and say, this is just a great, great piece of cake. And I say to you, I want you to copy this cake. And you're saying, well, some of you could probably get close to copying it. But the best way to copy the cake is actually to have, what, the recipe, exactly. So if you have the recipe, you can copy the cake. You see, the cake is the standard. But for me to copy that cake and score effectively on copying that cake, I would have to have the curriculum. The curriculum is the recipe. And what I would say to that is you cannot separate the two. You have to have the curriculum with the recipe. In fact, the U.S. Department of Education said that we must align the standards with a curriculum, which, by the way, they have developed model curriculum, and the assessments, which is the testing aspect of this. So basically what they're saying is we must align the standards, the curriculum, and the assessments together to have this. And so indeed, the U.S. Department of Education is very, very actively involved in this to the level as they are developing model curriculum and model assessments. And by the way, private schools will not be exempt from this. Can y'all still hear me?
Yeah, there's a little bit of static.
Okay, all right, I'm getting a lot of feedback, I didn't know. Okay, good. There are, and by the way, private schools and home schools will not be exempt from this. In fact, I'm going to quote from our governor, and this is what he said, quote, all schools receiving public funding, including private schools, accepting voucher-bearing students, should be held to the same standard. In fact, my daughter at a conference call, I was on a conference call with the governor, and my daughter was homeschooled, and she asked a question about homeschoolers and private schools. And he said, we must all get on the same page. We must all adhere to the Common Core standards. College entrance exams are now aligning themselves with these standards. Though the proponents are stating for private home schools that this is a volunteer effort. The problem with that is our children, to get college grants, they must score high on these Common Core assessment tests. And to score high on these specific assessment tests, they're going to have to adhere to the Common Core standards and the curriculum.
Just one second, Randy. Go ahead.
Try again, Randy.
Which now they're pushing the curriculum. It has a lot of anti-Judeo-Christian foundations within it. Specifically, I'm going to give you an example of English language arts. There's one county in Florida, it's West Palm Beach, by the way, that the Board of Education there, they are actually required to publish and reprint the textbooks that they were so outrageous. There were things in there such as they were creating divides between social economic races.
Randy, just one second, Randy.
Hold on, Randy.
And it's not a county that you would really think of as the oasis of biblical conservative thought. There's another textbook. It was a 4th grade textbook, again aligned with the Common Core standards. And the whole premise of the text, beyond the English structure, was how to communicate strong negative words in a manner to manipulate your parents. Like, that's something they really need to learn how to do. The cost is another issue. It cannot be sustained by the states. In fact, the Department of Education this past session, they asked for $400 and I believe it was $34 million to implement the Common Core standards this past year. And they started getting a lot of pushback. In fact, a former commissioner, Tony Bennett, was the one that asked for that, over $400 million. They started getting a lot of pushback on that. And he came back in the middle of the session. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I only need 100 million. Now, I don't know if that's the new Common Core math. I don't know exactly what that is, but for a state agency to make a $300 million mistake, I'll give you an idea how much money that is. That's more money than the FCAT, through the implementation of FCAT and the maintenance of FCAT for all these years. The FCAT has been implemented. That's more money than they needed for that. They need just this past year to implement Common Core standards. And by the way, yeah, they did need that money to implement it. There's teachers across this state that have been laid off because of lack of funding, because they took that $100 million and they're trying to implement Common Core with it instead of using it for local school systems, for teachers to do what teachers do best, and that's teach and train the young people, not the federal government. As a state, we'll have to go back to the federal government. And this is what they did. It's kind of like building a house. You pour a foundation, you get a couple sticks of lumber up, and you come back to the owner and say, we need more money because, look, I mean, we can't stop now. We're in the middle of this, and we need to go ahead and get it finished, so we need more money. And that's exactly what the intentions are, what they will do on the Common Core and not having appropriate funding to get it implemented. In essence, they're going to either have to go back to the federal government and ask for the money, or they're going to have to increase taxes within the local communities, within the local counties. The other philosophy, or the other problem with Common Core is it has a radical philosophy. The architects of Common Core are close friends of Bill Ayers. And there's a lady that's a very close friend of Bill Ayers. And by the way, Bill Ayers, anytime there's a Common Core conference, Bill Ayers shows up. And everybody says, well, Bill Ayers had nothing to do with this. Well, he's always there. He's always involved in it. And all of his very close friends are some of the architects of Common Core. Linda Darling Hammond. She actually worked for the CCSSO. She was on the validation committee for Common Core. It is now working for one of the national testing consortiums and a textbook publishing giant. All the writers of Common Core, through my research, as well as a professor's research, actually Dr. Moore with Hillsdale College, basically says that they're all atheists. They have a very, very anti-American position. They have an anti-constitutional position. And in fact, in some of his research, Dr. Moore's research, what he's found out is they have been very methodically within the Common Core curriculum and the assessments. They and as well as the standards themselves, they have been demonizing the U.S. Constitution. In fact, they have turned it into, or attempted to turn it into a living document. And if you know what the term is, you'll know what the problems with that is. And lastly, I'm going to mention that Common Core is actually built on a philosophy that is in a basis on a premises, that has a basis on that is a premises that the government is inherently good. And see, in contrast, our Constitution was framed specifically by the writers in a way that understood that the government was not inherently good. In fact, the Constitution was written to protect man from the government, not the other way around. And because of this, I remember in session when I was talking to some of the legislators, specifically about the data mining issue. They said, Randy, what's the problem? We're all Republicans here. You know, we've got this data and we've got to protect it. You need to worry about that. Now, I kind of think back on, I feel really comfortable about this data being protected. Let's talk about NSA for a minute. Or maybe we'll talk about the IRS. Oh, yeah. I can feel really good about our data being protected. You see, our government has degraded to a level that the people, it's trying to take the will and the responsibility away from the people, and it's trying to drive it to the government. And that's the issues that I have with Common Core. That's not the only issues, but those are the main ones that we have specifically with Common Core and what the problems are. I'm willing to take any questions on it. It is a very, very complex issue that we could spend literally weeks on, because it has been very, very methodically thought out. It has been very, very methodically planned to the point where they have gotten this thing implemented. Unlike Obamacare, which they actually voted on it, they've been able to get this thing implemented without a vote, because they knew that the people would not accept this if they knew exactly what it was. I'll take questions right now, so if anybody has questions, I'd be more than glad to take them. While I wait on those questions, I'm going to show you a cartoon that I was just given a few days ago at this conference. And if you look at it and study it carefully, there has a lot of meaning specifically behind it. This is the cartoon. If you notice there, you've got Jeb. It's one of the drivers. You've got Rick Scott also driving this train. And then you have it being fed by, it doesn't mention the name, but it looks like Obama, perhaps the federal government, feeding this thing. And then it goes on, you've got your legislators on the side there having a great old time, and our children are the ones that are risk on this. But I thought it was a very appropriate cartoon that somebody had given me a few days ago.
Randy, we're going to pass the mic around and let me know if you can hear the questions. Okay, go ahead.
I think I can. I actually heard people when they were asking questions with Congressman Yoho, so we'll try, and if it doesn't work out, we may have to get them relayed.
You're pretty well going up me. I'm Terry Osborne from Titusville, and I just wanted to know why Rick Scott and Jeb Bush are so much behind this if it's so bad, and what are we going to do about that? That's a big deal.
Well, it is a problem. I will say this: Jeb Bush has done a lot of good things for our state, and I'll give you an example: the child welfare system. He's done an excellent job on taking and privatizing our child welfare system. However, on the education system, he has had globalist philosophies, even when he was working our education system in the state here in Florida. He has partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have actually funded his foundation to implement Common Core. So if you follow the money on it, you'll see that there is a lot of money that will be made directly to some of Jeb's foundations. It is problematic. Governor Scott, I think I know why he's supporting it. I think that he may have originally thought, well, this is a good idea. Everybody's saying that this is a good idea, that everybody needs to step up the standards. We need more rigorous standards, which, by the way, the standards are not more rigorous. In fact, the gentleman I had cited, Dr. Moore from Hillsdale College, went through details on how that the standards were indeed not more rigorous. In fact, they were quite the opposite. There was a mathematician, there was one mathematician on the validation committee, and there was one expert in English language arts that was on the validation committee of Common Core. Both of those professors refused to sign off on Common Core because of the lack of credibility within the standards. Both of them refused to sign off. On the math standards, it gave things, the standards themselves actually did geometry without proofs. And if anybody knows anything about geometry, you can't really do geometry without proofs. That is a totally untested way of teaching geometry, and it's going to be a total fail. In fact, only one of the mathematicians on that said it's a total fail. So I don't understand. We need to encourage the governor and our legislators to repeal this thing, to stop this thing. This thing is a train wreck, and this will change the face of America forever. Obamacare was the federal takeover of the largest, quite frankly, largest private organizations in our country. And now they're coming after our children, and it will change the face of America forever if we allow this thing to go through.
Okay, we've got another question.
Mr. Osborne, sir, I am opposed to the Federal Department of Education, and I am opposed to this Common Core part of it. I think it is a matter for the individual states. Amendment 10 to the Constitution, and the Constitution would not have been ratified without the first 10 amendments. It's very important that this responsibility be left with the states. Whether it's a little tiny state like Delaware or Rhode Island, or a great big state like Florida or Georgia or Texas or Montana or whatever, we need to get the federal government out of our hip pocket where our wallet is, and we need to have less bureaucratic control.
You know, the education is something that is of real concern in our state. You know, in working with some of our local school board members, I mean, these are elected officials, these are local. Education needs to go to the local levels, the local school boards. That's where our education needs to go to. It does not need to be coming down from the federal government. In fact, a school board member a couple weeks ago gave me a book. I've been carrying this book around. It's like a boat anchor. The thing probably weighs 20 pounds. It's a textbook from history. It's a history textbook. And it's Marion County school system uses this high school textbook, history textbook. In that textbook, there's 36 pages of Islam. And I'm not talking about just historical data of Islam. It is a proselytizing of Islam. In that same book, there is about a paragraph of Christianity, and there's about a paragraph of Judaism. That's just one of the major problems specifically with this book. And I was on the education summit a couple weeks ago. Governor Scott invited me to this summit. I will say that it was a Delphi process. They already had a preconceived outcome on this. But I went because here's why. I would say, Randy, why did you go? Well, here's why I went. I went because if I didn't go, then they would say, well, Randy was invited to go and he wouldn't go. He didn't participate in this, so he can't blame us for this. Well, on the other side, if I go, they're going to say, well, Randy was part of this, and, so we shouldn't have any problem. We did this, by an open discussion on this. Well, neither are true. But, and this is the point I was making about the textbook, about this history textbook. This came down from the state. I asked the Department of Education, State Department of Education at that time, how these textbooks get approved. Well, there's 3 history textbooks that were approved that the local school board has a choice. The one I just described was the best of the choice. Now, if the state cannot get this education thing right with these textbooks, what makes us think that the federal government can get right?
Right.
That's my statement.
Randy, can you give the name of the book so people can get their hands on it?
You know what? what I will do is I will send an email out with a picture of that book. And I want you to take that to your local school boards, and I want you to ask the question, is this the textbook that you're using? And I'm going to tell you that's the best of the three. But I don't have it in front of me, but I will definitely get it.
Okay,
I'll get it for
we
you.
have another question.
Hi there. Earlier in your talk today, you mentioned data mining and you gave the number of a bill. Could you please repeat that number?
Yeah, it was Senate Bill 878. Senate Bill SB 878, and I'll tell you what happened on that bill. It went all the way through. The Senate. It passed the Senate unanimously. It passed the House. It went to the House. It passed the House unanimously with a very, very small amendment to it that had nothing to do with anything. We were able to get about 200 people to the Capitol that Monday morning. This was on a Friday. I'll never forget that day that this happened. We were able to get 200 people to the Capitol that Monday morning, and we were able to get 3,500 calls into the Capitol. And they allowed that bill to die because of the people and the outcry that the people had on it.
Can you talk about the September 25th event in Tallahassee?
Yes. We are planning a September 25th. It's when the House and the Senate are in committee. It's the first week of committee week. We have put together a program, and we're going to discuss some of the current issues that's going on with Common Core in the state. And then after that, we are actually meeting on the 22nd floor of the Capitol. So we are going to be there. We want hundreds and hundreds of people to show up. If we are serious about it, folks, here's the deal about Common Core. There are so many issues hitting us from so many angles. Anywhere you look, there's the Obamacare issue. There's states' rights issues, which, by the way, Common Core is part of that. There are just vast amount of issues. This one we can win, but the people have got to get behind this from every organization to win this thing. We are meeting on the 25th. We will get out the information on that. We're on the 20th. It'll be on the 22nd floor of the Capitol. After that meeting, we are going to go through and we're going to have a short presentation by me on committee, the whole process of committee, how it works, and a method and way of how to lobby our legislators. And then we're going to go out and then we're going to engage our legislators at the Capitol in those committees and let them know that the people still have a voice in this. The people elect them, and they are to represent the people. And once our legislators understand that the people are the ones that they are being represented by the people, and we are the people, we're going to show up and we're going to lead them on how to get rid of Common Core. That's on the 25th of September, and stay tuned for the details of that. We are getting buses. One is we're going to have a bus going up the West Coast, we're going to have a bus going up the East Coast, and perhaps one going up the middle of the state to pick up folks and help and get us to the Capitol.
Is there any point in pressuring the local school board members?
That's a good question, and this is my frustration about that. Those local school board members are elected officials. We elected them for our education system, our local education system. The problem is the state has taken the authority away from them, and they've taken it and took it to the state. Now the state's trying to give it to the federal government. But on the local school board members, we need to encourage them to, not to support Common Core. They need to openly come out and say, we are not supporting Common Core. We are having school board members doing that. We would like to see resolutions from school boards across the state saying, we are opposed to Common Core. This takes away our local ability to control, and we will not accept this. That's what we're asking for school board members to do.
Okay, I think that's all the questions.
that all the questions?
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being here on Saturday. I am so sorry I could not be here. I apologize for that. I was really looking forward to seeing y'all and being a part of what y'all are doing. Thank you, and God bless y'all.
Thank you, Andy.